Welcome to Vintage Garage. We have another full show today. This week, first up, we'll prepare the frame of the Titan Mk9 Formula Ford that we've been restoring to get it ready for painting. Then we'll take a field trip to Trail-Way Speedway near Hanover, Pennsylvania. The vintage stock cars are running tonight. That should be a lot of fun. When we get back, we'll paint the Titan frame. That'll be a big step forward for the car, as once we finish painting it, we can begin assembly. So stay tuned, we have a great show today. Glad you're here. This is the Titan Mk9 Formula Ford that we're restoring this season on Vintage Garage. At the end of last season, we completely disassembled the car to get it ready for painting. We have to make some repairs on the chassis. When we first got the car, we mounted a gearbox and motor in the chassis so that we could construct the braces for the gear shift lever. In particular, we fabricated this piece out of tubing and we tack welded it on the frame. The gearbox was in the way and we weren't able to put a nice weld on that. We need to permanently weld that on, and then we also need to sand the chassis to get it ready for painting. We'll have a quick review of jet flux welding in case you missed one of our earlier lessons. Our jet flux welding setup consists of a regular oxygen and acetylene tank, much like a traditional gas welding system, but in addition, this orange tank in the center contains a special liquid flux. When the system is running, out of the end of the torch comes a mixture of acetylene, oxygen, and the special liquid flux. We also use a very special welding rod. We carefully adjust the torch for a neutral flame. The greenish color of the flame tells us that the flux is being dispensed properly. Once we have the area of the weld hot, we carefully add filler material from the rod. When we finish the top part of the weld, we turn the chassis over so we can finish the bottom of the weld. With the chassis still upside down, we use a large diameter drill bit to remove the heads of the rivets holding on the belly pan. We try to be careful to drill through only the head of the rivet. We don't want to enlarge the holes in the belly pan as we plan to reuse it. We did a good job on that and it didn't damage the belly pan. We'll put it aside so we can polish it up later. Now, using a smaller drill bit, we drill out the remaining parts of the rivets, again being careful not to enlarge the holes in the chassis. Some we remove with a small punch. The motor and gearbox are sitting on the small engine stand behind the chassis. We need to remove the gearbox support and the V-brace for the rollover bar. They're really part of the chassis and we want to paint all the chassis parts at the same time. Next, we wash the chassis with thinner to remove any grease. We also look for any other spots that may need welding or additional work. We sand the V-brace to remove some surface rust. We notice that the brace still has the original factory gray finish on it. We spend a couple of hours sanding the chassis, doing one tube at a time. The light gray primer on the chassis is in fair condition, with some surface rust on most of the tubes. We turn the chassis over and continue sanding. The chassis number plate is affixed to the main bulkhead with the factory rivets, and we don't want to remove it. The car was made by Titan Cars Limited in St. Neots and Huntington, England. We visited the factory last year. The chassis number is 759004, meaning it was the fourth Mk9 chassis made in 1975. We carefully cover the number plate with masking tape so we don't get any paint on it. We also tape up the threads on the stud for the front brake pipe T. Then we blow all the dust off the chassis and do a final wash with the spray gun and thinner. That completes the frame preparation on the Titan Mk9. We'll paint the car first thing tomorrow. Right now, though, we want to take a trip to Trail-Way Speedway near Hanover, Pennsylvania. The vintage stock cars are running tonight. It should be a lot of fun. It's Saturday afternoon and we're up at Trail-Way Speedway, one of Pennsylvania's premier dirt oval tracks. There's a full field of vintage stock cars in the pits, and it should be a great night of racing. Out on the track, the water truck is working in the track. The track looks to be in perfect condition. At pit out, the vintage stock cars are lined up waiting for the signal to go out on the track for their warm-ups. The signal is given and the cars head out on the track. It doesn't take long for the cars to get up to speed. After warm-ups, it's time for the heat races. In addition to the vintage cars, Trail-Ways is running the Wing 600 Sprints, Figure 8 cars, Scramble cars, and 4-cylinder cars. The first heat race is for Wing 600 Sprints.
Cody Armentrout, Jerry Mack will lead the field down the back stretch as we get ready to go with qualifying event number 1. Drivers in heat 2 to the staging area. Drivers in heat number 2 to the staging area, please.
After the sprint heats, the lineups are posted for the vintage sportsman heat.
The sportsman cars will be up first, starting on the pole out of Hanover, the number 66 of Craig Coghill. Starting on the outside of row 1, second position, out of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, the 113 of Gary Vandergrift.
Next up is the heat race for the vintage modifieds.
Here's the way to line up for our vintage modified car heat event. Starting on the pole out of Mechanicsburg, the 06 of Brian Brooks. Starting second out of East Berlin, Pennsylvania, the number 0 of Craig Emmerich. Starting third out of James Creek, Pennsylvania, the number 33 of Lloyd Hockenberry. Starting fourth out of St. Thomas, Pennsylvania, number 49 of Tom Martin. Starting in the fifth position out of Jonestown, Pennsylvania, the number 46 of Larry Feldy. Starting sixth out of Enola, Pennsylvania, the number 45 of Tom Swanger. And your seventh and final starter out of Danville, Pennsylvania, number 98 of Bob Campbell. Figure 8 drivers to the staging area. Figure 8 drivers to the staging area, please.
Next on the card is the heat race for the figure 8 cars. Back in the pits, the scramble cars go out as the figure 8 cars finish their heat. There's a brief intermission before the feature races, and it gives us a chance to look over the Wing 600 sprints up close. This is the car of Brent Schoenle. This is the number 8K of Ken Bastian. This is the number 1K of Todd Sparr. The number 91 of Lal Stroman is ready to go. This is the number 76 of David Shirk. The number 35 is driven by Steve Owens. This is the number 66 of Gary Linderman. The crew checks over the number 23 of Chris Arnold. The body is off of the number 56 of Joseph Birchley, and we can see the 600cc motorcycle engine that powers these cars. The crew lowers the number 6 of Drew Highstand. It's ready to go. This is the number 19 of Terry Peters. Ricky Briner Jr. checks the fuel level in his number 61. This is the number 47 of Pat Close.
Last minute rush job.
I guess it's still possible you're going to make the feature, right?
I don't know.
This is the 00 of Greg Wales. The announcer calls for the Wing 600 sprints to line up at pit out, and Pat Close climbs in.
Line up for a 29 600 wing sprint feature event starting on the pole. Driving car number 76 out of Moncton, Pennsylvania. The leader is shown our plumbing and heating special. The driver, David Shirk, starting second. Driving the RTS chassis number 8X out of Emmaus, Pennsylvania. The driver, Kevin Bastian. Moving to the second row on the inside, third starting position. The car is by Dealers Magazine number 12H out of Manchester, Nathan Hell on the outside of row 2, fourth starting position. The Taggart Hub sponsor number 2D out of Coatesville, Rod Taggart. As we're ready to go,
Next up is the feature for the vintage modified and vintage sportsman cars.
number 46 of Larry Doty. Starting 6th, number 45.
The checker comes out on a hard-fought feature to end a full evening of racing. They really put on a great show at Trail-Way. It's now Sunday and we're back from Trail-Way. We sure had a good time and look forward to returning there next season. Now we need to get back to work. It's time to paint the frame of the Titan Mk9. We moved the Titan Mk9 frame over to the paint shop at Vintage Garage, and now we're at the bench and we're getting ready to mix our primer. In our last trip to England, we stopped by Arch Motors in Huntington. They're the company that made many of the chassis for British racing cars from the 60s. In particular, we wanted to find out what color paint they used. They sent us to Trimite, the English paint company in Uxbridge, London, where we got a full kit. We hope we have the right color now after many years of searching. The primer itself is a 2-pack etching primer. There's a base component that's yellow, and then there's an etching primer acid component. We like to use these containers from Rubbermaid. They have a graduated scale right on the side, and this primer takes equal amounts of both parts. So we'll do 500 milliliters of each part to get started. We need to stir the base component until it's evenly mixed, and we'll put in 500 milliliters of yellow. We'll just shake that for a few minutes and it should be ready to go. We'll strain the primer before we put it in the can to try to make sure we get out any chunks or lumps. We also want to make sure we have a real tight fit on our respirator. We've set the chassis on sawhorses so we can get to all sides of it. We put the V-brace on a sawhorse in the back and the gearbox mount on a sawhorse at the front. We want to paint all three at the same time. We apply a light, wet coat of the yellow 2-part primer to all surfaces. About an hour later, the primer is dry enough to lightly sand. We carefully sand every tube and remove any drips we find. We're going to paint the chassis with Trimite Q55 synthetic finish full gloss middle graphite paint. Again, we got this at Trimite in Uxbridge in England. There's a little drip here and we can see that it's exactly the right color for the chassis. The instructions say that it should be thinned 25% by volume with QT55 thinner, so we have a can of that as well. We'll mix the paint now and start spraying the chassis. Paint separated a little bit. It's black on the top, but the gray is down below, so we need to stir it a while. This is the first time we painted a chassis with the original English paint, so we're kind of curious to see how it works. Yeah, the gray is starting to show up nicely now. Not only did Trimite say it was the original color, but I can also tell it is because it's an exact match to the V-brace to the roll bar, which never had been painted. We apply a light first coat to all tubes in the chassis. We apply a final wet coat and then carefully inspect the chassis for any drips or places we might have missed. We don't find any problems and declare the job complete. It came out great. That's it for this week at Vintage Garage. We made great progress on the Titan this week, and the trip to Trail-Way was a lot of fun. Now we need to let the paint harden for a couple of weeks, and we can begin assembly of the car. Next week we have a special show. Most mechanics my age got their first introduction to engine work building and flying U-Control model airplanes. In particular, the planes designed by Walter Musiano and manufactured by Scientific Models. We still have a bunch of the old kits. This Cessna 182 is representative of the line. Typically they had a carved balsa fuselage, a solid balsa wing, a real good instruction set, a beautiful set of decals, and all the rest of the parts you need to finish the kit. We also have an old Scientific Bel Air, a Cessna 180, and one of our favorites, a Zigzag. Every year in September, the Northern Virginia Control Line Club sponsors a meet to honor Walter Musiano. Next week we'll head down to Lorton to check it out. It should be a lot of fun. So until next time, thanks for coming. Keep the shiny side up. We'll see you next week. More information about any of the projects we've worked on today, please visit our website at www.vintagegarage.com. There's a link to our email address on the website. Please email us. We'd like to hear from you. Till next time, keep the shiny side up. Thanks for coming. See you next week.